Hey everybody, welcome to my lecture on mechanisms of homeostasis. This is the third lecture in this series as we introduce the topic of anatomy and physiology. Last time we looked at organizational themes, and of course one of those themes is the maintenance of a stable internal milieu, as they say in Francais. And so, you know, um, in your eye is a perfect example of a homeostatic mechanism, right? You want to regulate the amount of light that enters. And there's a perfect amount, and you know when you've got too much or too little, you can't see. And so that's a classic mechanism for homeostasis, and it's protective. Okay, so um, when we talk about homeostatic mechanisms, we talk about these fundamental components of the system. And we say that homeostatic mechanisms typically have some set of receptors that are sensing the environment, a control center that has some particular set point that's ideal, and then some way to change things, the effectors, okay? And in the case of the iris here, your retina is full of photoreceptors, and whenever you're exposed to too much light, the retina sends messages to the brain and to the autonomic nervous system centers, particularly from the optic nerve. And there's a reaction. There's a certain ideal amount of light, and so the brain responds by contracting the ciliary muscles. And you can see these ciliary muscles that make up that iris right there that controls just how much light goes into the eyeball and onto the retina, and that allows you to see. All right, so the set points in the brain and the optic cortex or optical cortex. The receptors are in the retina, and then last but not least, the thing that's really changing the amount of light here is the ciliary muscles that control the diameter of the iris and pupil. And so that's a perfect example of a mechanism of homeostasis. This is an example of a negative feedback loop. Before I go on, look, this is a reason why you should never buy or use cheap sunglasses. McDonald's used to make sunglasses for babies. They thought it was cool. They put it in Happy Meals. Of course, what does that do to babies' eyes? Well, it burns their retina, right? The receptors in your retina are only receiving really visible light, but there's all kinds of other light, UVA, UVB, UVC, which are very damaging. And so the parents would give their kids these cheap sunglasses. They'd put them on, and they would trick the eye into opening up nice and wide, letting all kinds of UVA, UVB, and UVC radiation into their eye, messing up their eyes. So listen, go buy some nice sunglasses. And if you don't have enough money, you can go plead with your parents or the people that take care of you to say, like, hey, I don't want to get glaucoma or whatever other terrible diseases are of the eye. So we talk about negative feedback loops, and this was always kind of difficult for me to comprehend. And the classic example we use is like a thermostat in your classroom or in your home, right? So there's this control center, the thermostat, right? And it's got this set point, and it's constantly measuring the temperature of the room. And if it gets too cold, it'll send a message to the heater and to turn the heater on, and it'll cause that temperature to go up. And if it gets too hot, it'll turn on the air conditioner and it'll cause the temperature to go down. Now, that makes sense to me. Like, if it gets too hot, I turn on the air conditioner, I make it colder. That sounds like negative feedback, right? But look, if it gets too cold, I'm going to heat it up. Is that positive feedback? No, it's not. Negative feedback loops always control things to some set point, to some controlled place. A positive feedback loop is when we sort of like things get worse and worse and worse and worse. And a classic example of that in physiology would be something like pregnancy or birth. Okay, so when you're having a baby, the baby's head starts to push down into the birth canal, and that causes those smooth muscle that lines the canal to contract. And in fact, this smooth muscle is actually kind of stretchy muscle. The more you stretch it, the harder it contracts. And that contractions occur, they get stronger and stronger and stronger until bang, out pops a baby. Or you can talk about a wildfire, right? the fire starts, it's little, and it gets hotter and hotter, and the more heat it generates, the more it consumes. It consumes until you have this raging blaze out of control, like drug addiction. You start off by taking drugs once, and then you need more and more and more. These are examples of positive feedback where the system goes wildly out of control until you reach some crisis, like the baby's born and you drop dead, right? Negative feedback loop, it gets too hot, I make it cooler. It gets too cold, I make it warmer, right? We're bringing things back to a set point. And so that's what we mean when we talk about a homeostatic mechanism or negative feedback loop of homeostasis, right? We're going towards a set point. And the one mechanism of homeostasis we're going to be looking at over the course of the year is going to be the regulation of blood glucose. Blood glucose, right? So that's blood sugar. And there's some critical players here. Number one, the organ that senses and reacts has both the effectors and the set point is the pancreas, right? So the pancreas is this leaf-shaped organ. It sort of rests behind your stomach, and it dumps stuff into your small intestine, dumps juice in there. The pancreas is interesting. It has both a role in the digestive system, but it also has an endocrine role. And so the endocrine system are these organs, these glands that secrete hormones that help you control your body. The pancreas works in concert with the liver and the muscle, and in fact, all the cells of the body. When we talk about blood glucose, hopefully you know what glucose looks like. Here's an example of glucose right here. There's a glucose molecule, right? C6H12O6. Here's another one right here. Here's another one right here. And when you intake glucose, it gets into your blood. It's not good to have a bunch of glucose floating around in your blood. So what your body does is it stores glucose. It takes glucose up by the cells, and it doesn't just leave them in there all loosely aggregating around, floating wherever willy-nilly. It actually forms this big molecule here called glycogen, right? So we store glucose in a large molecule. So this is what it would look like if you saw it. It's got all these branches, and it's made up of individual glucose. It's a polymer of glucose. It's a polysaccharide, right? And so I take glucose and I turn it into glycogen, and I take glycogen and I cut glucose off to make glucose, all right? And so there's the two processes that allow you to store sugar and release sugar, all right? Pancreas releases hormones to store sugar. You store it in the liver and the muscles and other parts of your body as well. And then the pancreas also releases another hormone that causes glucagon or glycogen to be released, all right? So which one does what? Glucagon tells your liver to release glucose. Insulin tells your liver to store glucose. Insulin tells all the cells of your body to store glucose, right? So when I eat a candy bar, the cells of my pancreas sense that, and they release insulin, and it tells all the cells of my body to start storing sugar, right? Lower that blood glucose level. When my blood glucose levels get low, pancreas senses it, it releases glucagon, and it tells the liver to break down glycogen and raise blood sugar levels. A little more detail. So there are individual cells in the pancreas that are responsible for the measuring blood glucose levels and for releasing the hormones associated with that. And they are the alpha, beta, and delta cells. The alpha cells release glucagon. Remember, glucagon tells the body to release glucose, to break down glycogen. The beta cells secrete insulin. And remember, insulin is the hormone that tells cells around the body, but cells in the liver and the muscle, to store glucose in the form of glycogen. And last but not least are these delta cells, and they release a hormone called somatostatin, and that kind of tamps down the effects of insulin and glucagon. Not super important for our conversation, but I just thought you should know. All right, so insulin promotes glycogenesis, right? This is glucose storage in the form of glycogen. Glucagon promotes glycogenolysis, right? Lysis means to break apart. So I break apart glycogen, and that releases glucose to the blood. I know it's getting complicated. We're almost done. So how does it work? Well, we have conditions like hyperglycemia, which is high blood sugar, and hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar. Normally, uh, your blood sugar should be maintained around 90 milligrams per 100 mils. But if you can't regulate your blood glucose levels, you end up with a condition called diabetes, right? So let's think about what happens. So I eat a candy bar and I digest it. It's absorbed into my bloodstream, and suddenly my blood glucose levels go up. I become hyperglycemic. Well, the beta cells of the pancreas sense that high blood glucose levels and release insulin. Insulin travels around the body to the cells, to the liver, to the muscles, and it tells those cells to take up. It actually helps glucose to be taken into those cells, and that drops blood glucose levels. All right. Now, as those blood glucose levels drop, eventually I start to get hungry because I have hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia. Now, one of the things it's going to do is to make me hungry to go out and look for more candy bars. But another thing that's going to happen is that these alpha cells, that's the Greek letter alpha, are going to sense this low blood sugar. They're going to release the hormone glucagon, which will act on the liver to break down glycogen, glycogenolysis. As glycogen is broken down into its constituents, it releases glucose. And now my blood glucose level rises. All right. So I have this stimuli, high blood sugar, low blood sugar. I have the sensors, the alpha cells or the beta cells, and then I have the effectors. In short, would be glucagon and insulin. And that's it. So diabetes is a terrible disease. There's two types. Type 1 diabetes is this genetic condition. There's lots of different type 1 diabetes. There's multi forms of it, right? It can affect different pathways, right? I could have, a problem with the pancreas and the alpha cells, or I can have a problem with the beta cells, or I can have, a defect in the gene for insulin or glucagon. All right, so all these things can contribute to type 1 diabetes. So that's a genetic condition, and you have to get insulin injections your whole life. It's very difficult to maintain blood glucose levels on your own, right? You're constantly getting your skin pricked, but there's all kinds of cool technology associated with meeting out insulin for people who are type 1 diabetics. Now, type 2 diabetes is sort of one of the plague of our generations, and it has to do with what we call insulin resistance. So, if you eat a lot of sugar, a lot of unprocessed sugar your whole life, eventually you might cause your cells to become resistant to the effects of insulin. In fact, if you become obese, you're going to probably have type 2 diabetes. And of course, our diets here in America set you up for obesity and type 2 diabetes just because there's so much sugar dumped into your foods. And we're going to talk more and more about this all year long, but get those basic things down. Know what glucose is, know what glycogen is. Know what insulin and glucagon do respectively. Know what hyperglycemia is. It's all pretty straightforward. I know it seems complicated, but I also know you can figure it out. And it's really important as you move forward in life to maintain good, healthy diets. All right? And so that's my goal here, is to help you understand this stuff. And of course, that's the great part about anatomy and physiology. All right. See you next time.